are both of our unions believe in professional unity and unions coming together and working, and when you countries where that happens, things like their education systems are much better and they're much more run and inputted by the profession, and Finland is one of those examples. So we are the National Education Union. We are actually the only trade union at the Liberal Democrats Conference, and we have a proud history of coming here since 2002. Definitely, and Kevin's been here since 2010. He's been coming. So we have a proud history of coming along because actually we believe that education is a broad church of membership, of people in there, and actually we should be going out and having conversations with everybody involved in education, councillors, governors, parents, community groups, and so coming to Liberal Democrat Conference, we want to say thank you for having us and for coming to our Fringe. Today's Fringe is through the NEU Councillors Network, and at the end of the meeting I will explain a little bit more about that. But today is on education funding in crisis. The National Education Union, along with other trade unions, has successfully run a funding campaign. We run the School Cuts campaign. If any of you have not seen it, it's www.schools.org.uk. We've run that campaign very successfully alongside some other trade unions, and that is showing how much cuts are going on in individual schools. We've been questioned by the Conservative government on many occasions. We've been asked to take the site down, but every single time we've been able to prove that our figures are correct. In fact, they're quite conservative in our estimates of where we're at. So it's been a very effective tool. During the last election campaign, almost 800,000 people switched voting from Conservatives to vote for education because of our campaign, because they looked at the information. We did an education manifesto. What do kids need in school? We aren't affiliated to any party in the National Education Union. We work with all parties, but actually we managed to say to people, when you're electing people, ask them what they think about funding, ask them what they think about education, and make sure that you're putting that as on their lips. And what we've now done is, and actually I think, we've managed to make it impossible for any political party to ignore funding and the fact that education is in crisis. And I think that's a really good thing. And that's not just us on our own, but that's working together. The three things I want to talk about is, obviously there's school cuts. We've got something called the F40, which is a collection of local authorities, and we've also got the local councils network. And those are the three things we're going to be concentrating on today, and that's where the three panel come in. I'll introduce them as they speak each time. The first person who will speak to you is Kevin Courtney. He is the Joint General Secretary of the National Education Union, and he's going to cover the general concerns around funding cuts, and then we will take questions at the end when all three panelists have spoken.
Thank you very much, Amanda, and thank you all for being here. I think this meeting is really important because the questions around school funding, I'm going to say to you, have not been solved. Now, the question of how we approach the government announcements over the last few weeks, they take some thinking through. I'll put out some questions, you can answer them if you want to. Should we be grateful? Is the funding crisis solved? Can you trust Boris Johnson? And you might have seen there was a tweet the other day where the Conservatives have tweeted, they've taken a BBC story, doctored the BBC story, put out the BBC story saying that there's a 14 billion cash injection, and the BBC says that's not their story. They said 7 billion, they've doubled it on the Conservatives tweet. We can't trust them. Having said that, I think it's important to say that the fact that they have started to promise money is a sign that our campaign, that's all of us in the room, is working. We are cutting through, and it's all of us working together. It's teachers, their unions, it's my union, the National Education Union, the NAHT, ASCL, it's us working with the F40 group of local authorities, it's school governors, it's local councillors like Sam, and many other local councillors involved in our networks, it's thousands of parents. As Amanda said, we know from Survation that in the 2017 general election, 750,000 people changed their votes because of school funding. So this is where I start. I think we have made a bit of a breakthrough, but I don't think we've convinced the Conservatives that our children matter. If they thought our children matter, they'd have put the money in schools this September. There is nothing till next April. If they thought our children matter, they'd be doing something about the immense levels of poverty that many children in our schools are facing at the moment. I think that what we have convinced them of is that parents care about their children and that parents might vote for their children. So I think it's an entirely electoral calculation for the Conservatives at this moment, and I think that matters in how we approach it. So I don't want to show gratitude. I do want to say we're glad there's been a move, but it's not enough. And I want to go through some of the numbers that demonstrate why it's not enough. And I also want to talk about how important I think it is that we keep this alliance that we have, and I want to just put on record my gratitude to the Lib Dems for the role they have played in this funding campaign, but the alliances that we've got with councillors, with councillors, with governors, with parents, I think we need to keep that alliance together, and I'll come back to that at the end. So there is a promise of money from next April of about £2.6 billion. That seems like a lot of money, and that rises to £7 billion in 3 years' time. I tell you, there are some big problems with those numbers. And I'm going to go through some of them, but I'm going to try to stay away from numbers, because big numbers are difficult to deal with. There's a promise of some money. But in our view, it is nothing like enough, and we are doing work at the moment to look at where schools will be compared with 2015, and we believe that all the figures that we're looking at the moment will show that the majority of schools will still be lower funded than they were in 2015. We know that the money they've put in for SEN, high needs SEN, is only about half the money of the gap that we've identified. We know that the money in 16 to 19, which has been the hardest hit area, is only about a third of the gap that we know is already there and already identified. And in early years, we think it's only a fifth of the money that is required. So many early years providers will face closure, and state maintained nursery schools are in a particularly parlous position. If there is not an announcement in the next few weeks about a government grant being renewed, that has been renewed up until this point, but there's been no announcement of it. And so far they've said all these things about money and haven't said this, so that gives us some suspicion they're not intending to renew it. Many maintained nursery schools will face enormous difficulties. Can you trust Boris Johnson? You've given me your answer. Boris Johnson during the Conservative Party election campaign, he made a set of promises about education funding, and some of these have been repeated since. He said that we are going to level up school funding in this country. That's something we approve of. It's not true. There are schools that are going to be continued to head down. So continue to head down next April, not getting enough money, because they're saying they'll give them enough money for inflation, but they know that inflation is less than school costs are going up. When they're going to increase the money that teachers get paid, there will not be enough money, so those schools are going to continue to make more cuts than they've made already. That is not levelling up, and that is a broken promise by Boris Johnson. He said that we are going to have a minimum funding of £5,000 per pupil in secondary schools. Now that's a weird thing that they promised there, because they don't give secondary schools enough money to run unless you have children with special needs or English as an additional language. The base money they give you in the national funding formula just isn't enough to run your school. So as an add-on to the national funding formula, they say that we'll declare a minimum of £5,000 per pupil. We know that many schools will not get that minimum, because what will happen is school forums at local level, faced with the continuing cuts in SEN, will have to take money from schools to put into SEN. It's happening in many local authorities this year, so that schools aren't getting the minimum. So that's another broken promise by Boris Johnson. Many schools will not get the £5,000. And the third promise he's made is that we are going to have a superb level of education in this country. And that is so not true. We have the highest primary class sizes in the advanced world. They are not going to drop because of these figures. We are now at a 38-year high in secondary class sizes, and we don't think that's going to be turned around by these figures that we've got. So we are now currently working on how we update the School Cuts website to show the level of cuts in every school in the country. So we're going to work to update that to show what the cuts will be next April, and what the cuts will be in 3 years' time at the end of this funding program, these funding announcements that they've made. We think that's going to show lots of schools still making cuts, and we invite you to continue to be part of the campaign with us to say that they've made it sound like they're getting rid of all the cuts. It's hard to find that precise word in what Boris Johnson has said, but it's the flavour he's given, and that's certainly not happening. And I also think what matters for our young people is that this money that has been taken out of schools up until this point, putting some of it back in 1 year's time, in 2 years' time, in 3 years' time, won't change the fact that for many children in the school system now, that they have lost the special educational needs that they needed to succeed, that they've lost the music lessons in many schools that they needed, and I think a lot of parents are going to continue to be angry with the government because of that. So I think we have broken the logjam. They will not be able to say any longer that schools are the best funded ever, but I think there can be more money for our children, and I think we need more money for our children in the world that we're going into. And I want to say to you as well that we need to keep our alliance together for other reasons. Now, I don't know what the outcome of a general election will be. My union isn't party politically affiliated, so I'm not supposed to have an opinion about it on some level, but there are some outcomes of a general election that I think could be very damaging for education. And I think a government that has Michael Gove and Dominic Cummings at the heart of it, I think they have unfinished business with the state education system. I think they want to complete the academisation of schools. You see the sorts of announcements that they are making, political announcements, not educational announcements. They're branded as educational announcements, but as well as this funding thing, they have this announcement about pupil discipline. They say that teachers should be able to use reasonable force on their children. Now, teachers can already restrain children. But what sort of picture of our young people are they trying to create? And please do tell me how a 5'2" woman teacher can use reasonable force on a 6'3" boy in a fifth year class in New York. It's not possible. It's not the right way to think about our children. They say they want to do that. They say they want more free schools with more surplus places that will damage existing schools. I think they want more grammar schools and more grammar streams, and on the other hand they want some streams that are zero tolerance, and it's very much a sheep and goat sort of view of education that they have. They want to carry on with introducing their baseline testing regime into our schools, which is very bad for children, as we discussed in a fringe meeting earlier on. So I really invite you all to continue to be part with us of working on funding and to be part of these wider alliances. We're really proud of the work we've done with local councillors, proud that we've got Lib Dems leading that work. I mean, it's a cross-party alliance of councillors, but we've got Lib Dems, Labour, and we've got Conservatives in this grouping of NEU councillors that have been leading some of the fight on funding. We have a conference for those councillors on the 2nd of November, if I haven't got my glasses, backed by all of the party groups of the LGA, so the Green group of councillors, the Labour group of councillors, the Lib Dem group of councillors, the Tory group of councillors. It will be looking at how we continue the funding campaign, but it'll also be looking at the other big issues in education. What are we going to do about the huge teacher recruitment and retention crisis? The government, I think, has no policies on that. We think that working with you, working with local councillors, we can come up with policies to help. So please do not trust. Let's be sceptical. I mean, if they crash the economy by a no-deal Brexit, will this money still appear in April next year? I think we'll have to keep the pressure on in the event that that's going to happen, if we're in a position where they're leading this country. So I think we have to keep the pressure on for our children's education. Thank you very much for being part of the campaign.
And like I said, once we've heard from all of our speakers, we will take some questions. So my second speaker this evening is Peter Downs. Many of you may know him. He's a Cambridge County Councillor and Lib Dem lead member for children and young people. And he is on the F40 group. The F40 group, for those of you who don't know, is a group of 42 local authorities, some of whom are amongst the lowest funded for education in England. And the F40 group have set out to seek fairness and equality of opportunity in education for all. So a big round of applause for Peter. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation and the chance to take part in this very important event. I'm not going to match Kevin in terms of enthusiasm or excitement, but I would just like to say to congratulate him and the other unions for having brought this topic very much up the agenda, and that is good, because the more the public is involved, the greater the likelihood of it being solved. As I said, I'm a member of the F40 group, which rather bizarrely comprises 42 members, and they're county councils, and they were formed 20 years ago as a pressure group because of concern about school funding. If you want to know if your county is on it, I've got the complete list here, see me afterwards. But I think the interesting thing about it is that they're nearly all Conservative councils. Now that is not a fluke. That is because of the way school funding used to be created. Now, I'm so old that I can actually remember how school funding worked in the 1980s and 70s, believe it or not. But it's 22 years since I retired as a head teacher, and so my memory goes back that far. And in those days, it was the local councils that predominantly decided how much would be spent on schools. And the Conservatives were proud of the fact they spent less. That was a selling point in their election campaigns. We sell less, our tax is low, and we've got jolly good schools. That's the summary. Now, the point about the F40 group, and the F40 group broadly welcome the interest and what the government said, that's fair enough. But what I want to look at just for a few minutes are the underlying principles on which school funding should be based. And the two themes that I want to take up are adequacy and fairness. And before we can say that the funding is adequate or sufficient, and quite honestly, we all get lost in big numbers. You know, especially when they announce 14 billion over 3 years, it's very confusing as to know how much it's bewildering. So I just want to concentrate on adequacy and fairness. Now, adequacy for me means that you must define what it is you think you are funding. Now, a lot of work has been done on that. It's stored away in the DFE archives, but it's been done. I brought it along with me. The Education Funding Strategy Group did all the work on defining what we needed to run an education system at certain levels. And I was very pleased to see that, because one of my few claims to notoriety is that I was a member of a group which first proclaimed the need for a fairer funding policy. And I brought that document along as well. And we called it A Better Cake. It's dated 1994. And the important thing about that drawing, which my wife kindly did for me, this is the days before technology, is a fruit cake. Now, when she first drew it for me, it was a sponge cake with icing. And I said, I want a fruit cake because I want to be able to see what is in it. The point about a fruit cake is you know what's gone into it. You know the components in it, you can see them all, and you measure them all out. And then it's got to be cut up fairly and squarely. And so a lot of work was done on analysing what should be in the national funding formula, which will actually enable you to provide what it is you think you want. Now, obviously there's a huge debate about class size and all those sort of things, but it's all detailed stuff, and the detailed work has already been done. It's already been done, and this document contains 83 pages, 83 documents of specialised references. So the work has been done, and I would argue if you're going to have a rational, intelligent approach to this, you must do that. So adequacy is the first important principle, and adequacy means also, by the way, not waste, not wasting. If we identify waste, we shouldn't have that. The phrases you need to remember are ALF and NLF, activity-led funding, activity-led formula, and needs-led funding. Those are the two key ideas. You define your activities and you cost out the needs of the children you're going to serve. Now, why fairness? Because it is manifestly unfair for schools to be judged against national criteria when they are not funded in a nationally fair way. Now, there was a time when it didn't matter, frankly. In 1970s, it didn't matter very much because there wasn't any national testing or national qualification detail. But now it matters because we have an inspection system which is punitive and people can lose their jobs. Their livelihoods are at risk. And I argue, and I continue to argue, that in a civilized society, we must have a fair system of funding so that if we are being judged by national criteria, we have nationally agreed funding levels. So those are my two main points. And just before I sit down, I just want to make three others very, very quickly. The government has produced a new form, an NFF, in 2017, and it is moving in the right direction. There are things wrong with it, and we have pointed out some of the things that are weak in it. For example, one lump sum for all schools is nonsense, because if you have just one lump sum for all schools, rather than bigger lump sums for smaller schools, which is what you need, you're going to clobber small rural schools. And one of the things about this country is it's amazingly diverse. Some of the authorities that you live in have very large schools in very large towns, others have got tiny village schools spread across a huge area. And if you need to close down the small schools that are not viable, you, the county council, have got to pay for the children to be transported to the other schools. So that is another hidden cost put on the county council. So that, I think, is a point we need to bear in mind. Now, I just wanted to say these other things. The government is, in this new formula, the government is proposing two sorts of formula, hard or soft. It sounds like a bit like Brexit, you know. Hard formula, the government decides how much each school is going to get. Soft formula gives the money, it works out what they think the schools should get in an area, adds it up and gives it to the local authority to then decide. I'd just like to read you a phrase. Responsibility for allocating funds between schools should remain at the local level with the authority and its schools working together. Local stakeholders best understand what variations in funding are needed. It is not possible to devise a national formula that reflects every variation in local need. That is the DFE's own words, 2002. But it's still true. So I would argue that we need to retain the school's form, we need to retain flexibility at the margins to make decisions. There are two other things I should say very quickly. I think we've got to face up to the possibility of de-academisation. Academisation has been, in my view, a big mistake. We said so. John House and I proposed a motion way back in 2010 denouncing the creation of academies, and I think we don't like to say we told you so, but we did. And it's been worse than we thought. We said it would be costly, divisive and unfair, and it has, and it's been corrupt as well. And it is simply not acceptable that a person in charge of 34 schools should be earning £450,000. So we've got to work toward de-academisation. It won't be easy, but I think we've got to try it. I can say more on that later on, perhaps. The other point is there are so many things that could have been done, haven't there? For example, the misalignment between the fiscal year and the academic year sounds trivial, but it makes life extremely difficult. The academies have got alignment of funding on the FAB, but the rest of us, we have the money in April, and that is straightforward. We've been arguing that. I've argued that with John Major, I argued with David Miliband, and they kept saying no. Absolutely. So there are lots of things that could be better. We are moving in the right direction, folks. We're moving in the right direction. Let's not be too pessimistic. But it's not good enough, and our children deserve better.
Peter, I want to start by disagreeing with you. You have got as much passion as Kevin Courtney has. You have as much determination, and you absolutely put that so eloquently. It's a very complicated system, and without the likes of you and other people in the F40, this campaign wouldn't have got off the ground. So thank you very much on behalf of members and people in the school. Peter also talks about big numbers, and it's very difficult to think about big numbers, but if you think about school budgets, for example, in my own school we've got 9 pence per child for maths budget this year. We've got, in other places in the country, 34 kids in a class. We've got 3 or 4 children with education healthcare plans, so they should have dedicated support staff, 2 or 3 sharing 1 teaching assistant because there's no budget for it. We've got redundancies, and we've got no wraparound care anymore because local authorities have been smashed apart. And schools are basically becoming the frontline service, and I'm going to pass over to Councillor Sam Falder-Hughes from Kingston Council, and he's also a member of the NEU Councillors. He's in the book. He's been on the events and he's in the book. Sam is the youngest councillor on Kingston Borough Council, and prior to being elected was a trustee of the British Youth Council and has worked hard as a learning support assistant with children, behaviour and SEND requirements. So I'm going to pass over to Sam. Thank you.
Thank you so much for inviting me to speak. It was a real privilege in April to join councillors from across parties to deliver a letter to the government calling for more funding for our schools. I feel very passionately that local government needs to be listened to by national government. It shouldn't be a one-way dialogue, and too often it is. And the NEU has given us councillors a really strong voice on this education funding issue, and I'm really grateful for that. But I don't want to talk solely about school cuts. This isn't just about the money that's being taken from schools, it's about the broader climate in which schools exist. The effect of cutbacks to local government on our ability to deliver the services that deal with poverty and family instability. Not only are our schools underfunded, which would be bad enough by itself, they're also dealing with more than they've had to deal with before. Teachers are doing things that youth workers, children's centres and social workers would have done 10 years ago. And when I speak to teachers and parents in our borough, we get the same message back. You want more for less, and schools cannot continue to take on this burden. Now, I stood for council last year, not naive about the difficult choices that I would have to make as a councillor. We knew there was a really good chance that we'd take control of Kingston Council, and we did. But when you're in administration and you're dealing with the effects of Tory austerity, it means you have to take some difficult choices. The most difficult choice for me that I had to make in the last year was voting to cut money from children's centres and to close 2 children's centres in our borough. And I'm really proud of the work that we did as a Liberal Democrat administration to build on the Conservative plans, to completely, I'd say build, chop up the Conservative plans and to mitigate the damage. But the reality is, we've had 9 years of trying to mitigate damage, to do our best against a national funding formula which is working against us. And this can't go on any longer. Sorry, I'm just going to find my place. I've decided not to print stuff off anymore because I'm trying to be good for the environment. Now, the Tories say they want to give more money to schools, but frankly, I don't think the 4.6 billion that Boris has promised will touch the sides. And I think the fact that it's disproportionately going to grammar schools gives you an indication of the Tories' priorities for our education system. It's not enough to make up for the cuts to schools, and without a broader focus on public services which prevent deprivation and neglect, schools will continue to face an increasing burden. But I don't think we should be nostalgic either. Because often when we talk about austerity, we do get nostalgic about a time when there wasn't austerity, when there are issues that have been around for 40 years that we haven't tackled. We need to be thinking about the fact that kids who grew up where I grew up in South Somerset, not where I'm a councillor, have long been far less likely to go to university than kids who grew up in urban areas. And actually, one of the things that I see in Kingston, where I am a councillor, is that kids who grow up in poverty in places like Kingston struggle disproportionately. It was John Prescott who said that we shouldn't be giving money to boroughs like Leafy Kingston, and this attitude needs to change across party. A kid growing up in poverty in Kingston is a kid growing up in poverty in Kingston. It doesn't matter where they live. They should have access to the same services and the same support wherever you are. And I think we as Liberal Democrats have a really unique voice in this education debate. We believe that people are individuals, and we believe that public services should treat people as individuals. Our focus on lifelong learning, abolishing Ofsted, a public health approach to tackling youth violence, and the pupil premium all show the kind of vision that we need to turn this situation around. And finally, I want to say that since becoming a councillor, I don't feel quite so powerless anymore. You can make a huge difference to this situation. You can make a huge difference in local government. And if you haven't studied to be a councillor and it's something that you're thinking about, then I really want this to be a persuasive argument. It is difficult. You do have to make tough choices. But I think it's really important that it's Liberal Democrats making those tough choices. And we may be on the precipice of a change in government. And I really hope that we are. But if we're not, then our schools and our young people need more Liberal Democrat councillors. So please think about standing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sam. And I can see you must be doing a great job in your local council, so well done. I've just got a couple of things to plug before we take some questions. Kevin mentioned the NEU Councillors Network event. It is about developing and creating our network. We've got lots of workshops on building a charter, which is what makes a good local authority with regards to education, RSE, education in schools, recruitment and retention of teachers, campaigning and funding, a real look at what is an academy, and we've been doing some really good work in the union with the NEU Councillors Network on anti-racist charters. Kevin talked about the climate changing in the country, and there's quite a lot of hatred building in some of our cities and around the country, and it's about looking at what that is. It is completely free. It is for 150 people, and we already have 130 signed up, so there aren't many spaces left. So it is on the 2nd of November, sorry. You'll get to see me again because I'm chairing. The other thing, also, it's in London. The other thing is that we also have, with regards to this, we have a hashtag at NEU Councillors, so it's NEUCLLRS. And so if that's our Twitter account, we also have the hashtag NEU Councillors. And if you want to find anything else about this, it's very easy. It's nee.org.uk/councillors, CLLRS. So please do have a look online if you think, and see if you want to be involved. I'm going to take some questions now. I'm going to take 3 at a time. And if I point, I am sorry, because I'm normally better at saying this, but I'm going to take some 3 at a time questions and then ask the panel to come back. And you have to bear with us, we have 1 microphone. So the young lady there at the end.
Hi. I was just wondering about, I've noticed in the thing about funding for pupil premiums for 16 to 19-year-olds. I was wondering about the younger years, because obviously the funding has been cut so much, pupil premium is just filling in the gaps, and obviously that's not what pupil premium is supposed to be doing. I was just wondering about the policy for funding under 16s and increasing the pupil premium and making sure that that's not just plugging gaps.
Thank you. Lady back with the bandana on her head.
Very much building on this lady, but I work in early years initial teacher training, but I trained in special, and I'm really worried about special needs children in early years, particularly from disadvantaged backgrounds who don't have parents fighting on their behalf. I feel like they're a generation who are going to be utterly scuppered before they even start in the school system, and I think when so much money is going to grammar schools, I'm wondering what our advocacy and campaigning plans are to stand up for a very vulnerable and very voiceless group of very small people.
I'll take one more on this side to be easier for Henry, and then I'll take it for another. Gentleman at the front here.
Are there a lot of EU teachers, say possibly doing languages in and in FE colleges are likely to disappear in Boris Brexit?
Thank you very much. Who would like to take some of those questions back?
Well, thank you very much. They're all very important questions, all deserve a session on their own. I was in favour of the pupil premium, I have to say, when it was first introduced. I think our colleagues Sarah Taylor and David Moores were involved in that, and I think it is a good idea. But it has to be an extra. And what has happened, I'm afraid, is that because schools have children money, they have been deflecting some of the pupil premium to cover other costs. I'm a primary school governor, like many of you, and I'm chair of the resources committee. I can't think why, but anyway, they put me on chair, and we follow this very carefully. And I'm insistent that our head and the school manager at School Bursar demonstrate very clearly that the pupil premium has been used as a top-up and not just to plug the gaps. But it's very, very difficult to do that unless you've really got well-informed governors who's got the eye on the ball. But I think you're quite right. But I think we ought to maintain the principle of pupil premium and certainly enhance it for younger pupils. I just want to say another thing about early years and special, and we haven't gone into this in the main speeches. But these are the two areas where we in my Cambridgeshire county are very concerned indeed about the lack of money in the early years and for special needs. Special needs, the demand of special needs is growing enormously. In my own council, in the schools forum, we had to make a decision to transfer money from the schools block to the high needs block. We just had to do it, and I was glad we did, because the schools forum met, we heard the need, and the heads of the schools responded by saying yes, we must do that. But the fact of the matter is the amount, the proportion of children with special needs is increasing, and the severity of the needs is increasing for all sorts of medical reasons, which we don't need to go into now. But that is the fact, and yet the funding has not increased pro rata to do it. So I think we should certainly concentrate on early years and in special needs. And I, as a secondary school head, I always argued for more funding lower down, because if you're going to get things right, you've got to get it right early. It's no use, we can muck about with French A level or whatever, but it's all happened before they're 5 practically, never mind 7. And the kids used to say, it's all happened in the first few years, and if that is not funded properly, then we're struggling later on.
Thank you.
I mean, 3 really important questions, and the idiocy of our politicians of not investing in early years and not investing in low incidence, in low special needs, not enough ordinary just TAs working with children before their parents put in a request for them to get even higher support. I'm not getting quite that, but that's not coming across the way I want to there. I'll come back to it. But on pupil premium, I think your party was absolutely right to bring in the pupil premium. David Laws and Sarah Tether led that work. It was introduced in 2014. There was an election in 2015. The Conservatives have not increased the rate of pupil premium at all since then. So it's not gone up at all for inflation since your party got them to put it into the coalition. So its significance is being lost. On special needs, I said that it's only half the money they need. What this government has done in recent years is increased the eligibility of special needs from 19 to age 25. That's a good thing. They put no money in. So they made it much more widened the eligibility and put no money in. That is insane. They've really cut back on the support at the early stages of special needs. So there are far fewer SENCOs and TAs working with SENCOs, and therefore parents then put in requests for more and more support. And they win whenever they go to appeal. Generally parents win. So the cost of special needs is going up dramatically because of stupid government policy. There are 2,600 children, we believe, not in any form of education at the moment who have EHCP plans, and that doesn't mean they're being home educated, it means that they are just not in education at all, and it is absolutely disgraceful. And on the EU teachers question, I've met with a group of teachers at South London Secondary School on Thursday of last week, and there were some fantastic French teachers there. I was talking with them, apologising for our country, asking them if they were going to apply for settled status, and they were absolutely clear. They regard it as insulting. They've been here working with our children for 11 years. They won't apply. And I think we will lose a lot of modern foreign language teachers if this goes ahead in the way we're resisting.
Thank you very much. I'm really glad you brought up the point around the pupil premium, because I've got a lot to say on using it to fill existing gaps in their funding. When I was working in a secondary school, it was something that we saw that the school was having to do. Part of the reason, one thing that I would really like to change with the pupil premium is I wouldn't like to just see more money go into it. I would like to see us expand the eligibility. So what we were having to do was siphon money away from children who were eligible for the pupil premium towards children who fell just outside that boundary. So we know that many people in this country are working and in poverty. Working poverty is a fairly new thing that our welfare system isn't really set up to deal with. And children of parents who were in working poverty fell just outside that eligibility for the pupil premium, but still required the school to give them the services that they needed to thrive in school. So it's really important that we think about the eligibility, that we think about the situation that we're in, where lots of people are taking on short-term jobs, gig economy jobs, and lots of people, far more people are living below the breadline. I also think the point about parental empowerment is incredibly important, and it's something that we don't talk about enough. I think that parents from poorer backgrounds need much more help in advocating for their own children. We see, when I speak to parents in my ward with children with the EHCPs, often they've had to go to free specialists, they've had to jump through so many hoops. What I don't hear, the people I don't hear from, to be quite honest, are the people who haven't jumped through those hoops, who've just listened to the first specialist, and it's those children that I worry about. Yeah. And then on the third point of EU teachers, actually far fewer children have been taking languages for about 20 years in this country. I think it's one of the root causes of Brexit, that our young people feel less mobile than young people who live across the continent. I think it's an absolute disgrace that EU teachers are feeling put off by Brexit. They don't feel that they want to apply for settled status. When you speak to EU teachers, when I speak to EU citizens in my ward, they don't feel welcome in this country anymore. And we need to do a lot more, and I think we are doing a lot as a party to stop Brexit, but also to heal the damage that's been done to our relationship with those people. But I think one thing that we could focus more on is how we improve languages education, how we get it started earlier, and how we make our young people more mobile and more able to access the benefits of being members of the European Union.
Thank you, Sam. Okay, some questions for the gentleman over there, the glasses, and then the lady in front, and then this.
Thanks. Colin Martin, South East Cornwall, I'm a teacher as well as a counsellor. On the numbers, we've heard 14 billion, but it's really 7 billion. We've heard a few days later there's this big 25% pay rise coming in for new teachers and probably all the other teachers down the line. But we haven't heard a number of how much that figure would cost. Do you know a figure? Because that would help to put the other one into context. Because I bet a few days earlier, when head teachers heard there was this extra money coming, they didn't think, oh, I can rush out and pay my teachers massively more. They were probably thinking about bringing back some of the TAs that they said.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, two quick questions for Kevin. Firstly, 2 years ago we spoke at a conference, my concerns about the numbers changing under our feet during the 2017 election campaign. This year's local election campaign, we had a large number of our councillors had signed up, including myself, for the network, and had signed the funding letter. We had tweeted that we had done this, and Facebook and everything else, and then we weren't included on the list, or we were included on the wrong council. I tried raising it and got no response, and obviously it's not helpful in an election campaign, so can we just get sort of basics sorted? That'd be really helpful to our campaign. But the bigger question is, I mean, I have two sons who have special educational needs, so I have some experience of what it's like from a parent's point of view. And when people come to me as a counsellor, I'm hearing it very much, the school is in there with the other professionals as potentially the enemy. You know, they are the ones who are denying the support. And talking to colleagues about, so we had a situation where they were trying to transfer money from the general budget to the special needs budget and so on. When we're dealing with these issues, it is very, very complicated for counsellors. And I think one thing you could do that would really help the counsellors in the counsellor network is if, not all in London, but in the regions, you could provide training sessions and so on, so that we can understand, one, we can help individual residents better, but also when these big policy decisions are coming up, that we feel that we are better informed when making those decisions on what it's like from the professional's point of view. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Mark Corey, and I'm the lead for the LGA on children and young people. I've got Nick Cott here, who's the second. I think it's important for the councillors in the room to know that that's my job, so if you want to speak to me at the end to take forward some of these things. I had a lead briefing from the LGA civil servants the other day, and they basically were looking at the next meeting what our priorities would be. And they had a section on funding that was quite small. And I was saying, what about academisation? What about the whole system here? And they said, well, we've tried that, we've been trying to work with this government and get nowhere. So I'm going to make sure that actually we're going to be as active as possible, and Nick's going to back me up, and we're going to constantly go on about that. They said it's up to the union, but it needs to be a role for us as the LGA as well. The speeches were very inspirational. I think the academisation issue, I'll come back to in a minute, is really important. What Sam said as well, it's such a big issue. We're talking about funding not just to schools. There's such a bigger issue with mental health, with getting to school in the first place, with cuts to transport. So I think actually, because it's so vast, we need to focus on only a few issues. So the school cuts campaign has been fantastic. I passed a school cuts motion and leader of the council as well as being a teacher part-time. So it's here at all ends. But the school cuts motion was brilliant. We gave us all the information we needed. We kind of need an update now as to what's the difference between what has been promised and what the whole was. But I think we do need to focus on a few things. I think de-academisation is one of the key things, because our system is rotten. And so if you want to just add in a bit more money, do a few tweaks here, that is not going to change the engine, which is the problem. And I do think we need to, as a party, be brave, and I'm willing to do that in my role, and to speak with Lane and Ryan and others who are in education, to actually make sure we are brave about saying we need a new policy. Labour have the whole national education system. Sounds good because it's similar to the NHS, but we've got to make sure that something will work. Will that kind of national system work? I'm not sure. Do we need to work with Labour to make sure we know what kind of alternative we have to the academisation system? So that's my input. Thank you.
Thank you. And just before I pass those questions over to the panel, I just wanted to repeat that actually at the session we are going to be talking about academies and where we go, and around de-academisation and the various things that we can do about that. I'm going to pass over to the panel, and anyone want to take that?
Colin from Cornwall, I think, raises a really important question. As well as the funding announcement, they then announced this pay rise. Obviously very welcome. £23,000 is the current starting salary for teachers in most of the country. So going up to £30,000, 23% or some sort of increase across 3 years. There is nothing there that is extra money for that, so it's immediately coming out of that money that they've announced. We've done a very conservative thing. We've put those figures in, and we've said, well, we assume that the leadership and the mains and the upper spine and the top of the main spine will only go up by 3% a year instead of those huge increases. We're putting those figures into the School Cuts website now with those conservative assumptions in order to show what the impact of that is in real terms comparing your school with 2015.
And we're very proud of the accuracy of the School Cuts website figures, that they've resisted every attempt by James Cleverly and other Conservatives to attack them. So we have to get them right, and we're working on them at the moment. But I think that's one way you should not trust Boris Johnson, because they announce money with one hand, and then we have to get the population of the whole country to do it. But they'll then just put other costs on schools which just come out of that, and which will mean that many schools will be going down next April, not up next April. So we're working on those figures at the moment. Apologies if we got anything wrong on the councillors, but we're improving our systems all the time. And we will have a pledge for PPCs in the general election around funding cuts, and we will be advertising all the candidates who are signing up to that, and we are talking to people in the Lib Dems about how we get that pledge out to your PPCs and receive them back. So we are working on that, and apologies for any mistakes we've made. And your point, I think, about there being, it's all too easy for parents of children with SEND and teachers to end up seeming like they're on different sides of a battle. And sometimes, I regret to say with some justice, on that the parents are right. You hear stories of parents asking for their child to go to a school, quite often an academy school, not exclusively an academy school, and the school saying, "Oh, we're really not cut out for your sort of child." And those are decisions that aren't being made about individual children, but about individual institutions. They're protecting the school's league table position. We don't want a child like that. They might not do as well. And so there are sometimes conflicts. We have been working, Henry there has been doing a lot of our work on this to make sure that our union and our funding campaign has been working really well with SEND parents. So SEND National Crisis, we've been working with them on having days of action, on talking with them. I spoke at their lobby outside the High Court when they were taking the government to court about the levels of funding. I think it's really important that teachers and parents of SEND see that it's government. I mean, quite often parents of children with SEND are also very angry with councils because councils aren't. And we've been working to try and ensure that it's really clear that it's central government that isn't putting the money in, that has to be at the centre of people's complaints. And I agree with what Mark said, that there are many other issues besides the funding issue, and it's really vital that we work with the LGA and councillors on those issues. So thank you very much for raising those important questions.
Yes, thank you. All very important questions. I don't want to add much to what Kevin has said. One of the great advantages that you as a union have is access to data and the data systems. And you can analyse them much better than we can as individual councillors. Individually, we look at our own bit or our own school, and it looks dreadful or good, depending on the week it is. But you're in a strong position, so I would like to commend that and ask you to work also with the NHT and with our school, because I know they are very much on the ball on this one. I just want to say one thing about these figures. I find it extremely irritating that the government says things like, we are improving education in real terms. I think they are redefining the word real. What we know what we think is real, but sometimes they just use this phrase because there are more children in the system and there's more money, therefore it's increasing real terms. But what children are actually getting is not improving in real terms. So we do know, and I look at the IFS, the independent body, we do know that in what we would call real terms, the funding for education has dropped by 8% over the last 5 years. We know that. And when that happens, in a school, faced with shortages, you lay off teaching assistants. Because you've got to have teachers in front of classes. And they've got to have some books and pencils and so on. So you tend to, and when you do that, you're exacerbating the very problem that people have raised about children with special needs. And that is a really serious issue. Thank you for your mention of the LGA. I think you've got to be very active. I don't know how, but you get support from the Conservatives on the LGA. Because I think this ought to be cross-party, really, and that's where I hope people like the F40 can help with that. We need to work together on this. I think that's what I'll say.
I'm just going to pick up on the point on teaching assistants. Having been a teaching assistant myself, I think when I was working as a teaching assistant, everybody else who I worked with, including myself, we all had second and third jobs. We were doing quite a stressful job during term time. In some instances, just as stressful as what the teachers were doing. We were dealing with kids with severe behavioural needs, severe SEND needs. We were doing a lot of prep and a lot of thinking about how we approached those children's specific needs. But we didn't have enough money, realistically, to live off or pay rent. And it's absolutely, we need a higher teacher's starting salary, but we need an actual living wage for teaching assistants as well. Then to go back to the point on de-academisation, I absolutely agree with de-academisation. I think having academy trusts with 38 schools in, if the whole point is that you're creating a system that's more accountable to the individual parent than a local authority was, then surely you would have a much more, you'd have much smaller academy trusts. And actually the ones that are smaller tend to work better. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't change the system. That doesn't mean that we should allow small academy trusts or that we should allow academy trusts. We need a wholesale system change. I think we need de-academisation, but we also need to look at how we improve on that LEA model that we had before, how we make sure that it's more responsive to the needs of individual schools, and how we allow schools and teachers to alter the curriculum to suit the needs of their children. Because I think we've too long had an approach in this country which is all about the national curriculum and about national targets and bureaucracy for teachers, and actually not allowing teachers to think about the kids in their own classroom.
Okay, it is just gone 15:15, so it is time. We haven't got time for any more questions, I'm afraid. I think that what's been really good here is we've had some really inspiring speakers who've not only talked about the downsides, but also given some alternatives of how we can push forward. I will push again the NEU Counsellor Network. If you aren't a counsellor, please get your own counsellors to be in charge. It's a great opportunity to literally network and defunk all of this language that the Tories are using and the government are using. I mean, we've heard about the changing of the language that we're using this way. They've talked in government around abject poverty. We're no longer talking about poverty of children. They've now put another adjective in because they can't say that there are less children in poverty. So they've now got to say abject poverty. So all of these languages are being used, and we have to simplify this situation, and we have to come together and continue working together, because actually the kids in our schools up and down this country deserve so much more, and we can only beat that and make that better if we work together. So thank you so much to the panelists. Do come and visit our stall over the next few days and have a chat and pick up all of the various leaflets that we've got, and enjoy the rest of your conference. Thank you for having us.
Is there something you'd like to say? I've got Councillor Hina here. What would you like to say?
Hello.
What did you think about it all?
Brilliant. I'm a member of the NEU Counsellor Network already.
And which, tell people which, where you are,
from Merton.
Thank you.
But I'm also now the parliamentary candidate for Sutton and Cheek. So he's just mentioned the fact that he wants all PPCs to sign up as well with the NEU statements on fair funding.
Thank you.
Completely support that.
Thank you so much for being here. And I tell you what, as well, something that I'm so passionate about as well is, pushing forward for money to be given so that our youth, right now there is a lot of children who, we've seen the knife crime in London, and children are just dying. So I would love to see a lot of money put in schools so that we see more youths, more youth workers going into schools and supporting children, and at least they can have the extracurriculums. And that is something that I just wanted to add. And also the meals, I would love to see money given in schools. So I would love to see children getting at least one meal a day. And also, what about the issues of school uniforms as well? If we could push forward for this, it would be absolutely wonderful. Those are some ingredients that would really, really see children enjoying, and even parents' burdens lifted. Thank you very much. And just sending this in, it was really, really nice to join in and just hear what is happening. Many, many thanks. Thank you all for watching as well. So goodbye from me and reporting here in Bomas, Juliet Makapila. Many, many thanks. I should be tweeting this shortly. I hope you enjoyed watching. Many, many things to consider. Please put your comments below so they can see as well. Bye-bye. See you later.